Hi. My question, what is the most common objection you get from skeptics? Or I guess what's the most common thing you address with people when you give them your napkin talk? Because I find myself being like, yeah, that was awesome. And Mike Licona was like, mic drop. And I agree with that, but I have
Literally though? Mic drop?
but I have the same worldview. So I guess I'm trying to put myself in someone else's shoes. What are the most common objections you see?
Yeah, great question. So typically the most common objection is hallucinations. And so I address that. If you're talking about scholars, they will give a different kind of objection. Some say hallucinations, okay, but the tendency now amongst skeptical scholars is to say something like, well, miracles, by their very definition, is the least probable explanation. Historians must choose the most probable explanation, and so they can never choose a miracle explanation. And to that, I just say, well, what makes you think that a miracle is defined as the least probable explanation? Least probable in reference to what? And they'd say, well, it's the least probable thing to occur. I said, well, how are you thinking about that? Well, people don't rise from the dead. Okay, I agree with you. When we look at chemistry, biology, things like that, the laws of nature, people do not come back from the dead by natural causes. But that is not what we are saying here. We're not saying that Jesus came back from the dead by natural causes. If the hypothesis is that Jesus rose by natural causes, then I would agree with you. That would be the least probable explanation. But it wouldn't be a miracle in anyone's mind. That's not how you define miracle. A miracle would be an act of God. And if God existed and God exists and wanted to raise Jesus, well, then the resurrection becomes the most probable explanation, right? So least probable in reference to what? So they have a confused thought about what a miracle is. They give one other explanation too. And they'll say, well, a miracle would be a theological explanation because it requires God's intervention. But historians can't look at theology. They've got no access to God through the tools that they use. So they could never conclude that God raised Jesus from the dead. And to that, I'd say, yeah, I agree that they can't conclude God raised Jesus from the dead, but they could still conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. Well, what do you mean by that, Mike? And so I give an example. I'd say, well, let's suppose that astronomers they've been tracking a comet and they know that on a certain day, let's say April 4th, 2023, they know that this comet is going to crash on the moon's surface at 9:05 a.m. Eastern time. And so everybody's looking on their televisions because the Hubble Space Telescope is zoomed in on the lunar surface. And at 9:05 Eastern, boom, tomorrow, the comet crashes on the moon. And as the dust settles on the moon's surface, they see a message written on the moon that says, Jesus is Lord. And it's written in Hebrew and in Greek. Now, here's what an astronomer would say. Wow, that's an extraordinary event. It would appear that it would take God to do it. I certainly, as a scientist, don't have any explanations using the tools of science to explain how that occurred. I know that the comet hit the moon. I know that it left the message, but I can't explain how it happened. So, as a scientist, I conclude that it occurred, but I'm going to leave the cause of the event undetermined because I don't have any tools to say God did it. Now, here's what a scientist would not do. Wow, that's an extraordinary event, and it would appear that it would require God to do it. But as a scientist, I don't have the tools to show that God did it. So I can't even affirm that the event itself occurred. Now, that would be lunacy to have such an explanation. But that's exactly what some skeptical scholars want to say today. And so it doesn't work.